Another episode of Fox News. Alright, so I want to be talking about primitive accumulation today. It's a big deal. It has, at least in Marxist theory, we should really pay attention to it. This is the most boring shit, by far. It's the most boring. But if you want to learn how people have acquired their wealth over the last, 500 years to 1,000 years, I would definitely pay attention to this video. This built the whole entire world, y'all. Primitive accumulation is the basis for anyone who's wealthy is wealth. So, yeah, the point of primitive accumulation, the whole point of the theory is to counter the investment argument that capitalists bring against Marx's labor theory of value. They'll say things like investors deserve what they earn or what they make in their salary because they take the most risk. They risk all this stuff by investing this money, by investing in these companies. It's just bullshit, honestly, and it's very easily debunkable, but you gotta get into boring ass numbers and boring text to get there, and it's pretty much what I've done. This video is boring as fuck. So yeah, let's just get fucking right into it. So yeah, bringing up investment is important because whether or not you like it, we do need some sort of somebody investing money in wherever you need it. For some reason, we trust private individuals to do that. I'll get to that later. But yeah, some say these workers don't deserve to get paid better because there's scarcity and risks and all that. These workers, a lot of them risk their lives, especially the ones in the third world. They jump into these conditions because they absolutely have to. And I mean, it's a smack in the face to see someone say they deserve $2 a day or less than $2 a day or $2 a month. I mean, there's people that make less than $2 a month and they're working for these huge corporations that, they really try to keep up their PR here. And yeah, it's amazing. So, why are these big investors seen as the highest risk takers when plenty of workers risk their lives through dangerous work conditions and poor health, and the big investors only risk being poor? Why should private individuals be the ones to decide where investments go and not the people or the state? So, is it ethical for private investors to receive massive amounts in return? Hell no, it's really not, especially when workers still have to worry about their current condition, eating and stuff, that unnecessary bullshit. Have wealthy investors acquired their means of investing through ethical means? No, because, most of the time, 99% of the time, it's acquired through surplus value or primitive accumulation. And that's accumulation before capitalism, or if you're talking David Harvey's version of it in his book New Imperialism, then you're talking accumulation by dispossession, which is just taking stuff. And that happens a lot. Yeah, I'm sure you've heard about it. They don't word it like that. Yeah, Karl Marx brought up primitive accumulation. I don't think he coined the term exactly. I think that came after capital. But he says people who owned land historically would acquire this land through what is basically sanctioned theft. And this is in opposition to Adam Smith's theory that more often than not, people would acquire their land or their capital through ethical means. Marx doesn't say this just up and happened. He claims that this accumulation happened over centuries. Like usual, it was a process. Reality is in constant motion and all that. It started back in the latter third of the 1400s. So this is a quote from Marx. Capital, page 507. We've seen how money is changed into capital, how through capital surplus value is made, and from surplus value more capital. But the accumulation of capital presupposes surplus value presupposes capitalistic production presupposes the pre-existence of considerable masses of capital and of labor power in the hands of producers of commodities. The whole movement, therefore, seems to turn in a vicious circle, out of which we can only get by supposing a primitive accumulation, which is previous accumulation of Adam Smith, or, before capitalism. Preceding capital accumulation. An accumulation not the result of the capitalistic mode of production, but its starting point. So, page 507. Marx says there had to be some sort of primitive accumulation for there to be any sort of capitalistic production, because in order for this mode to take place, quote, considerable masses of capital have to already exist. Adam Smith completely misses this in Wealth of Nations. If there was to be any sort of transformation from feudalism to capitalism, it would not be because serfs ended up acquiring or producing considerable masses of capital. It would be because the people in power expropriated it. Another quote from Marx's Capital, page 511, and he's quoting Francis Bacon in his History of Henry VII. In his History of Henry VII, Bacon says, quote, enclosures at the time, 1489, began to be more frequent, whereby arable land, which could not be manured without people and families, was turned into pasture, which was easily rid by a few herdsmen, and tenancies for years, lives, and at will, whereupon much of the yeomanry lived, were turned into demesnes, which is land attached to a manor and retained for the owner's own use. Francis Bacon is a source of utmost reliability here, as his quote goes against the status quo of his time and is against his own position in society. Bacon, who was known as the father of empiricism, served as Attorney General and Lord Chancellor of England, giving him access to many documents relevant to the arguably recent history he cites. And here's another quote from Marx. You're going to hear some just stupid ass words that I don't even really know what they mean. I'm not going to know how to pronounce them, but this stuff, some stuff will at least make sense. You just got to get through some of these words that it'll be okay. The process of forcible expropriation of the people received in the 16th century a new and frightful impulse from the Reformation, and from the consequent colossal spoliation of the church property. The Catholic Church was, at the time of the Reformation, feudal proprietor of a great part of the English land. The suppression of the monasteries and see hurled their inmates into the proletariat. The estates of the church were, to a large extent, given away to the rapacious royal favorites, or sold at a nominal price to speculating farmers and citizens who drove out en masse the hereditary subtenants, and threw their holdings into one. The legally guaranteed property of the poorer folk and a part of the church's teeths were tacitly confiscated. Pauper you be Jacet, cried Queen Elizabeth, after a journey through England. In the 43rd year of her reign, the nation was obliged to recognize pauperism officially by the introduction of a poor rate. Quote, the authors of this law seem to have been ashamed to state the grounds of it, for, contrary to traditional usage, it had no preamble whatsoever. By the 16th of Charles, 1 page, chapter 4, it was declared perpetual, and in fact, only in 1834 did it take a new and harsher form. And that's Marx, page 512. In this woman, Sutapa Bose's 1988 peer-reviewed work, The Problem of Primitive Accumulation, she cites a quote from the first page of chapter 31 of Capital, saying, he didn't only cite land expropriation. Quote, Marx identified the following different sources which contributed to primitive accumulation. Quote, the discovery of gold and silver in America, the extirpation, enslavement, and entombment in mines of the aboriginal population, the beginning of the conquest and looting of the East Indies, the turning of Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins, signalized the rosy dawn of the era of capitalist production. These idyllic proceedings are the chief momenta of primitive accumulation. And that's Bose, page 1169, and Karl Marx, page 790. On their heels, oh god damn it. Here's another quote. Page 790 again. I don't know why the hell I separated the two in the script, and I'm just a transcript. Just what the fuck ever. Here's another quote. On their heels treads the commercial war of the European nations, with the globe for a theater. It begins with the revolt of the Netherlands from Spain, assumes giant dimensions in England's anti-Jacobin war, and is still going on in the Opium Wars against China. The different moments of primitive accumulation distribute themselves now more or less in chronological order, particularly over Spain, Portugal, Holland, France, and England. Marx, page 790. Bose, however, says there is yet to be a precise quantification of the sources of accumulation, though the sources are apparent. There are numbers provided on how poorly small-time farmers were able to accumulate, though in Bose's writing, pouring salt on Adam Smith's wounded theory of ethical accumulation. She says there is a definite consensus among scholars on when the most accumulation took place, which was before capitalism, and that there was no doubt a need for investment outside of domestic savings, for industrialization to advance as fast and as much as it did, but, quote, none of them provide any quantitative basis for their assertions. And luckily, she gathered that data herself after the fact. Quantitative Estimates of Primitive Accumulation and Its Sources by Bose and Ashok Rudra is a work in which they provide estimates of the rate and volumes of savings and capital formation within the context of Industrial Revolution in Great Britain. This article gave honest data and was consistent with the hypothesis of primitive accumulation, but to get a greater understanding of primitive accumulation, they should have expanded beyond a couple of centuries and observed how wealth had changed in the centuries before the Industrial Revolution, not just the decades before. In an article called Surnames and Social Mobility in England, 1170 to 2012, published by Springer Science, Stanford professor and economic historian Gregory Clark and his partner Neil Cummins found there was a break from the lack of social mobility around 1800, but since then there has been a sort of stagnation. Quote, Overall, the rate of regression to the mean of these elite surnames suggests there has been a modest improvement in social mobility rates between the medieval era and the modern world, with that change occurring around 1800. But what is remarkable in both periods is the very high implied intergenerational correlation, 0.73 since 1800 and 0.83 before 1800. That is Clark Cummins, page 13, 2014. So even though there was improvement, there's still a high intergenerational correlation, which means children still inherit a great portion of their parents' wealth and stand a much greater fighting chance against government intervention. Typically, parent-child correlations in socioeconomic measures are in the range of 0.2 to 0.6. And that's Clark Cummins, page 1. In their conclusion, they bring up another batch of bombshell information, citing Clark's earlier work with other authors which found similar trends in many other places. The relative constancy of the intergenerational correlation of underlying social status across every different social environments in England, very different social environments in England from 1800 to 2012 suggests that it stems from the nature of inheritance of characteristics within families. Strong forces of familial culture, social connections, and genetics must connect the generations. There really are quasi-physical, quote, laws of inheritance. This interpretation is reinforced by the finding of Clark and work with other co-authors that all societies observed, including the USA, Sweden, India, China, and Japan, have similar low rates of social mobility when surnames are used to identify elites and underclasses, despite an even wider range of social institutions. We do have modern-day occurrences of primitive accumulation as well. Since this accumulation is happening today and not before capitalism, it's very different. But the accumulation is made through similar means, and like I said, this is what David Harvey talks about when he mentions he really coined the term himself, accumulation by dispossession. Instances of modern primitive accumulation include the United States war in Iraq, in which Halliburton Oil Company and plausibly Dick Cheney profited off the war by exploiting its oil reserves. This is such a well-known instance. I mean, everyone knows about it. It's kind of hard not to know about this. If you're someone that's my age or, even a little bit younger, you pretty much just know about it. But I mean, if you're younger, then I'm including it. It's such a well-known instance. It was included in a Hollywood film called Vice. Christian Bale's in it. He played Dick Cheney. You might have heard about it. And a quote from either he's former congressman or present congressman Henry Waxman. This is a quote from Henry Waxman. One of the unique features of the log cap contract is that it apparently allowed Halliburton to profit from virtually every phase of the war with Iraq. And that's from BBC News 2003, May 30th. Even if these amounts of wealth that a member of the bourgeoisie attains are acquired in a friendly, ethical sense, this should not mean they have the right to leave employees worrying about their next meal, when the resources for feeding them are available, at the very least, in the United States. To pay somebody a wage of $7.75 simply means the entrepreneur just never had enough money to employ the people in the first place. If what they paid workers is just, then they will surely be fine if, they drop off and get sent to the low rung. But they don't want to. It's a risk for them to invest all that money, right? They don't want to be poor, is the thing. They really don't want to get paid what they pay other people. One could ask whether we just start over and everybody gets the same opportunity to generate capital. And of course not. That's a goddamn stupid idea. Don't even goddamn suggest that shit. It's not how it works. I talked about that in the other video. If you haven't caught on, then watch it again. This would just mean the restarting of the capitalist inequitable progression without the primitive accumulation occurring prior to it. Private ownership and private investment should not be condoned or permitted because it leads to surplus value being taken, and more so, economic power being left in the hands of a few people as the free market functions in a nature related to an unregulated sports league. And I'm not saying like no countries call for like, like a more like, what do they call it? Like condensed, like sort of government where like less people are running things. I'm not saying no place calls for that. I'm not saying no country wants that. It's just when the people running it are also like driven by financial interests, that's never a good sign. It sounds like corruption, if you ask me, especially if you have like laws or, like allowances to be able to like just take as much donations as you want, or take as many donations as are offered to you, and that's just freaking ridiculous. Like, you can accept an infinite amount of money from as many people as you want, as long as it's okay to, as long as they're like an okay donor. And it's just complete bullshit. But yeah, about the sports league thing, the Yankees have always won like a bunch of World Series because they're rich. They get a bunch of, whereas the NFL, you don't have teams totally dominating the whole league forever. There's like really no dynasty in the NFL. But I mean, it's not really something to really stoop to. It's kind of just a cheap point. But yeah, what particular features of an investment makes a person entitled to unending wealth? Really, I mean, I don't think you're entitled to shit if you're a private investor. I don't think you should be investing money. I don't think you should have that freedom. Yeah, an investment creates growth in a firm. Although many times in history the means for investing have been stolen, and sometimes legally. Many times. Investments give a firm opportunities which firms without them would not have, such as better quality workspaces, sometimes, better means of production sometimes, a better ability to pay workers sometimes. Like, we live in a labor aristocracy. The people in the third world don't. We get paid better. Tell me the fuck why we get paid the amount we do, though. I don't know. It's because we're just complacent. But yeah, then there's wider publicity, all that other shit. Investment is good, but I mean, who should it be in the hands of is the thing. To me, I think maybe a workers' state would be the best. Some people think you should send delegates. Some people think that people should decide all on their own. It depends. It really depends. It really does. And I don't think the people are always the smartest people. But I mean, that's my goddamn opinion, and you're totally, free to judge my opinion as much as you want. If it's not my country, who the fuck am I to say who's to run your country? I don't have any right to say that. I don't know. As long as they're not a goddamn fascist, I guess. Which is, that's objective, right? You can objectively identify a fascist. I'm going down a rabbit hole, but really, just think about this stuff. I gave you some data. Please, if you don't think I gave you enough, you can always go on the internet and look up primitive accumulation. Look for some more data. Do some investigating on your own. Maybe I didn't provide enough data to convince you. Convince yourself of something, either way. Or don't. Just always stay wondering. That's cool too. But, have a stance in the meantime. That's just what I suggest. I'm going to cut this off. This is about done. I didn't want to make this series super long anyway. So, this is Fox News. I've been doing this at night. I might call this nightly, or nighttime Fox News. I don't know. It sounds kind of nifty, but I might just keep it Fox News. Who the fuck knows? No one watches this. I mean, come on. Have a good night.